Welcome to the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm Andy Cleff, and today I'm thrilled to have on the show Patrick Verdonk, friend, colleague from, oh my God, the Happy Melly days.
Yeah, a long time ago, 2016, 2017.
Yeah, so much has changed and so much hasn't.
Oh yeah, life's still going on.
Indeed. Speaking of things going on, I saw that you were at a conference in Spain at the end of 2024.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. How was the conference? You had a workshop and you were on crutches. Pick the thread you want to tug on.
Exactly. So it's been kind of an interesting experience. There were a lot of things that were first timers for me. The first time I ever participated in a conference or participated and actually contributed to a conference. I've never done any conference talks or stuff like that. It was nice. It was a challenge because I'm not a very extrovert person. May sound like that sometimes, but not really. The second is, as you say, Andy, I was operated on my ankle two weeks before. So first time on stage on crutches. First time ever I did a workshop with crutches. And a very interesting experience because you have to imagine the conference was in a cinema. So there are different movie theaters around and you are on stage, which is big. So if somebody has a question with your crutches, you go from one table to the next. We were running around all the time. It was very interesting. But more importantly, I think the content of the workshop, what I try to show people during the workshop is a way that artificial intelligence can help a change agent to take care of the boring stuff, let me put it like that, so that you get more time to work on things that actually matter. Like you're having conversations with people, your observations, sitting next to people, helping them process what's actually going on, make sense out of it. While you can use the artificial intelligence to set up your own change team, to generate different types of communications, to write specific documents. You don't need to do that as a change agent anymore. So it was interesting because I had these people create their change team first and then show them how you can have that change team. So define 3 different characters with 3 different backgrounds from 3 different departments and let them discuss the change that you have at hand and see what it comes up with. And it's really funny because people are really, really surprised actually by that way of using artificial intelligence. It goes beyond just here, if you have a data set, make me an analysis. It's actually interacting. In the end, it's the same. No, you type prompts, but you type prompts like if you're working with a team, which is different. And another thing that I've always said with AI is by doing your learning. What do I mean with that is I've learned to formulate better questions in real life by formulating prompts in AI.
Interesting.
Because it doesn't matter if you talk to AI or you talk to a real person, what matters, but it doesn't matter from a perspective that the answer you're getting is only as good as how the opposite party is interpreting your question.
Right. I love that. With my partner, communication is 50-50. What I think I meant and the words I chose, they cross that chasm, they get to her ears, and there's interpretation. At least with a chatbot, you can try again without pissing them off. Let me try to rephrase that, honey.
That's the good thing. Yes. Exactly. So yeah, so practicing makes better. No, you're actually improving.
I love it.
This kind of words better not, because in the end, what is the AI is maybe it sounds a bit strange, but to me, it's the average of how people in the world think. And if that average is because it incorporates every time that there is new responses, it incorporates that. So it's never getting beyond average.
Yeah, and there's a danger in there, and that there's lots of smart people talking about it, but as long as we're aware of the risk.
Is that thing, Andy? So if there are 10 smart people talking about it and putting their things in, and there are 500 average people talking about it and putting their perspectives in, the 10 smart people perspectives are leveling out. You don't see them back. It can be very helpful, but use it wisely. A lot of traps.
Yeah. Speaking of using it, you shared with me an advanced copy of the book.
Yep.
And I'd love to dive into that and make that the focal point, I think, of the balance of our conversation with a few detours, as we are prone to do. The book title is Beyond Frameworks, Navigating the Ripple Effects of Change Model Interactions. And you also gave me a sneak preview of a fast follow about metrics, one of my favorite ways of understanding our progress. These both explore organizational change, complex environments, but before we dive in, share with us something that we won't find on your website or your LinkedIn profile. What did you once believe that is no longer true? I stole this from Daniel Pink.
So maybe the answer is in line with Daniel Pink as well. I'm not so sure. I remember when I was younger, as we all were, no? When we started working, I really believed to be successful, you have to climb the corporate ladder. The way for other people to see that you're successful, and for yourself, because of that, to be successful, it's getting higher up. So you do everything to make sure that people notice you, that people know where to find you when there are promotions to be given away and stuff like that. But over time, I learned that success has a lot of different phases. I got to know myself really well, I think, over the past 20, 25 years or so. And I've discovered along the way that success for me comes much more from the gratitude that I receive from people when I've been able to help them. So I don't measure myself anymore on corporate ladders or the size of my salary or the price of my services, things like that. I'm just trying to help people, both in business as well as in privately. You know? There's always somebody in your surroundings that is struggling with something. And even though you may have no idea what it is about or no idea how you can help them, just be there, sit down, listen to them. It's often already helping people and giving you a look back like, thanks for just not giving me advice. That is sometimes also what people need. So, and that makes me feel just really good. And if I feel good, I think I'm successful.
So many consultancies, the big ones, have the playbook and have a traditional approach to change management. Some of the larger frameworks, follow these steps, bump, 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 bump. Your book explores why these approaches might not be serving us so well. In fact, failing us. And you bring a case study, which we'll touch on in a minute. Mm-hmm. But when did you realize that these traditional frameworks and processes, while valuable in some places, might not work in complex environment we find ourselves in today?
So it's a good question, Andy. And there's I think the answer is interesting. It's not that the corporate playbook that these big companies bring with them, it in itself is not working. It's just not complete. Let me try to explain that. The big consultancies that I know, when they come to a company, they bring with them their change model. Often it's change model that is known in the market because my customer likes to hear that. There are customers that just don't like to hear a lot of fuzzy stuff about models that they are not aware of, that they don't know. What the big consultancies normally bring with them are process models. The process model is a model that explains to you or that guides you in how to execute your change. And that's just not enough. I'm a big fan of Lean Change. Jason Little's Lean Change, a facilitator and a fan and a promoter and ambassador for that since 2016, I think, 2017. But it has evolved over time. One of these evolutions, though, was Artifact. It was called Big Next Now. And this is when I realized that the now is actually what we're always working with. The models that companies apply, and I can call them by name. It can be the Kotter's 8 steps. It can be ProSize, ADKAR system, ADKAR model. They're all tackling now. Meaning to say, I have my change defined. Now let's start doing it. But how do you get to the definition of your change?
The finish line? Is there a finish line? Is that even the goal?
They have in their mind what the outcome of the change should be. So but once you have a process model, you need to have a clear direction or you need to have an end target. Because otherwise there's no process that takes you there.
Got it.
Right? So this is the philosophy of those big companies. You want a digital transformation. So we're going to do a digital transformation. Here's the roadmap. 2 years from now, you're done. It's not possible because you can't make a 2-year roadmap. The simple reason is this, no? Your environment will change at the moment you start changing. I've always said the same thing. I can do an initial analysis in any company. I can tell them this is the first step to take. But after the first step token, you have to revisit your starting point. Because as soon as I make a change in the context of where I started, my context has changed. As soon as a change starts in execution, you're touching the status quo that you started from. We always say we want to go from one status quo to the next. But if you want to go from one status quo to the next, your current status quo doesn't exist anymore. at the point in time that you start taking action because something's changing.
Right.
So making a plan, telling people in 6 months we're going to do this, it's very daring. And you're raising expectations of people for something to come, which might turn out to be impossible to do in 6 months because of the way that the company has reacted. This is not what we expected. And so why is this not what you expected? Well, we would have guessed that you would have guessed, but because you're guessing, you're always working from a hypothesis, right? So your hypothesis, you have to verify, you have to validate it. And what the trick with the big companies, with big consultancies, is that they hardly ever have a plan B, right? So do something, you have to follow the plan because I get paid by you. The contract I have with you says that the next 100 days with a team of 5 people, €1,000 a day, we will spend to execute this plan. After 2 months, through insights, through new insights, through feedback, through conversations with people, it turns out that the other 10 months that are still in the plan don't make much sense to do anymore because something in our in competitive environment, something in our own company, we have invented something great and new that we need to incorporate. And you tell me, I can't. Right. So you're telling me, no, you first have to waste 10 months for 5 people.
Because we made a plan when we knew the least.
That's the whole point. When you work with people, which is what change is in the end all about, you always deal with complexity.
Right. So you have to adapt and respond. You have to send in probes. And in your book, I loved your use of different, I don't know if they're diagnostic, maybe they're sensing models and tools that give you information and feedback on what's happening.
Yes.
So that you can adapt and respond and not just follow the predetermined path. Talk a little bit about some of these models.
So there's this big mix now. We started with the now, which is the process models that are being applied by these wonderful consultancy companies, and they have their use. At a given point in time, in a given context, they have their use. No problem at all with that. But they explain how you execute change. They don't explain what it is that you need to change, why this change is needed, and why the change is needed now. So, and there are other change models for that. And this comes from a 2016 presentation I found somewhere. Belgian guy, André de Greve. He talked about classifying change models. And I was like, hold on, classifying, what do you mean with classifying?
Yeah.
And he explained that what he sees are 5 different types of change models. So first of all, there's life cycle models. And a life cycle model is actually a model that helps you make sense of where you are as a company and where you're going. So it's really the external part of the analysis, right? Why do we need this change? Why do we need this change now? We want to go agile because the rest of the world is going agile. It's not a good reason. It's not a model.
No, we've learned that.
But there are moments in time where additional agility in your life cycle is a necessity. For example, if you are a company which is in a very stable market, and I can't avoid to get to the example that I used throughout the book. So for the people that don't know me, I worked for 20 years in first Alcatel, then Alcatel-Lucent, then Nokia. And Nokia lost the battle for the mobile phone world. And one of the reasons is that in their company life cycle, from the origin of Nokia, they've always been able to reinvent themselves.
Right. They started doing what?
They started as a paper mill.
As a paper mill 100 years ago.
Yes, over 100 years, 18 something, I think it was. So they've done anything along the way. So the paper mill gave them the idea that, hey, what we are actually doing is we're generating power with our water mill, because the paper mill was next to a stream, and they used the
water power
for the paper mill. So they turned from that to copper cables because they figured out they could generate energy with that. So and for the energy you need cables. So for the cables they got into hardware. From the hardware they got into home equipment, televisions, whatever. They even figured out that to cover the cables, you need rubber. One byproduct, the company that they bought made rubber boots. So they needed knowledge about how to make rubber that is flexible and that you can put around the cables. So you can still, I'm not sure they're still there because I think they must be from the 20s or the 30s, from the previous century. But there were Nokia rubber boots. From that, they got into telecommunications, household equipment, telecommunications. And then, of course, because of being a Finnish company and Finland always being cold and Finland being a rock, where it's difficult to dig holes to put in cables, they got into mobile communication. So it's really reinventing themselves all along. So it's cyclical. It goes faster and faster with the development of technology. But the life cycle model is telling you when it is time to move on and reinvent yourself.
And it sounds like they were incredibly successful at it.
Yes.
I looked up some numbers, and at their peak, 2007, they had 50% of the mobile market share.
Right.
They were connecting 1.3 billion people, 20% of the world's population. So
Right.
they had gone from a paper mill to a telecommunications leader. So they were clearly successful at
Yes.
change. What the
Yes.
hell happened?
They got too comfortable.
They got comfortable.
There's a point in time where if you this is a personal belief. I personally believe that if your success is too big, in the end you get too comfortable, and they lost interest. They ignored signals from the market, and this is what life cycle models help you do. They help you identify what is the right moment in time, or be ahead of that. If you want to provoke something, to move on. And to move on doesn't mean drop what you're doing right now. And this is where the agility comes into play. No? So companies can use lean principles. They can use 80s kind of management models as long as they're in their status quo and they're just optimizing. But when you discover or you figure out or you observe, well, and nowadays you have to go when you sense. When you sense that there's this moment to move on, you need to be able to quickly get into there and to quickly get out of it again. Let's be very clear. Innovation costs money,
Right.
right? This is why you can drop everything. You always have to do both in parallel. And at a given point, any given point in time in a company, you have to focus more on the status quo, less on innovation to generate money from the products that you already have. And at another given point in time, you have to put more money in innovation and spend your savings.
It's a balancing.
That's an up and down. And it's good management, good leadership in a company knows how to balance that out. So companies that say we need to be everything agile, I don't believe them. I don't believe them. There are things that are parts of an organization, and there are moments in time within the life cycle of an organization where being not so agile is actually good because it allows you to earn more money. Now, not everything is about the money, but you still need more to come in than goes out. Basic principle of business. As long as we stay in the black, we can have shareholders that want to earn more money, but as long as we stay in the black, we don't go bankrupt. We give work to people. We're maintaining families.
It's the human element.
Yep.
Talk about some of the other different models for making sense of this complex, if not chaotic, world.
So if we know why we need to change, and somewhere at the bottom, no, we have already our ideas about how we can change. Then there's only one thing left to do. What needs to change? What do we need to change? But it's interesting to know why we need to change. But when we look at the what, and there's one famous model that I used throughout the book, which is McKinsey's 7S model, which this is a diagnostic model. It helps you understand which parts of the organization I need to look at when I'm touching and what the impact might be on other parts of the organization. One of the projects that I worked in was a company that had changed part of their IT department towards agility. Well, that part of the organization that didn't change to agility yet was all that they called legacy. Now, when you look at a McKinsey and you say, okay, strategy is we bring the other part of the legacy systems into that agile organization. So this is, you call it a strategy change, no? They wanted to keep it apart at first, and then they wanted to integrate that. Okay, so what's the impact? It has an impact on more than half of the people of IT who are still working there. So it has an impact on their process. It has an impact on their knowledge and how they share their knowledge. It has an impact on their ways of working. It has an impact on their leadership. So continue with that. And then there are two more different models at that level. And you come quickly to that, no? Because the core of the McKinsey model is about the values. Meaning to say, okay, so what do we value within this organization, and are the values aligned with the surroundings that we call the company? But it's not just values, it's your whole company culture. So you can imagine that if a group has worked for the past 3 years in an agile setting, and another group in a very traditional setting, and you put those two together, that you need to have a conversation about, okay, what kind of culture do we want within this new team or in this merged team? And then the third part is, how will people individually respond to that?
The culture of these two ways of working.
It's ways of working, it's ways of being, it's ways of doing.
Yeah.
That is what people have grown in 3 years in an agile setting to talk as normal might be a completely different language. That's cultural.
Yeah.
But then there is still in that part of the legacy group, there are people that like this kind of change, and there are people that don't. I see culture always as people say it's the sum of how people are acting or behaving within the company. Yeah, but it's the sum, right? So it's a bigger whole. We never talk about a person's culture. We always talk about company culture. It's the company, but there are individuals in this company, and that's what makes it complex.
Yeah, and those individuals will behave differently depending on what meeting they're in, who they're
Yes.
meeting with, and what they're talking about.
Well, they respond differently depending on there's things in people's private circumstances that influence that as well. Personal responses, individual responses to a change can change overnight.
Even quicker, in an hour, in the meeting, and then in the conversation that happens in the virtual corridor after the meeting. So we've got we've got the life cycle models. We've got your 7S as one of many.
Diagnostic models. There are other ones that you can use as well, but
Culture, individual, what else?
process.
Process.
And that's where we come to the execution. So now that we know why we need this change, and yes, we are convinced that we have to start with it now, we know what we need to change. We know what cultural impacts we may expect, and we have an idea about what kind of responses. It's having an idea about the responses just to avoid that it comes to us as a surprise, because we can't manage people to change. We can't just guide them. So that at level, we know what to do and what to take into account, what to expect. In the old corporate world, they call it, we identify the risks. No? That's what it comes down to a little bit. Call it risk management. I grew up in the 90s in business, so call it risk management. It's what it is, right? And then based on what we've seen what we want to change, what change is needed, and the why and the position we are in the life cycle, we can choose our process one. And maybe Kotter is a good one for this change. Or maybe forget about all the linearity, and we really need to approach the change in a much more agile way. And then we talk about the lean change management and likes. But I don't stare myself blind on lean change neither. Sometimes a company is just not ready for that kind of process.
Yeah.
So guess what? If they want ADKAR, we do ADKAR, but we do ADKAR in cycles of 1 month. And suddenly they get it. Or what we do then, and we apply the techniques from lean change within the ADKAR model. Everybody happy. There's a lot of ways that you can play around with that, and the limit is actually simply in the toolbox of the change agent. Because I use the models that I used in the book because I know them. It doesn't mean that they're the right ones. It doesn't mean that they're the only ones. You'll find in all these chapters around each of the model types, right? So you find examples of other models that you can use. If you feel more comfortable with Kotter, apply Kotter. If you feel more comfortable with ADKAR, apply ADKAR. I use the competing values framework from Cameron, and complete my sentence.
No, I'm having the equal senior moment.
Okay, so I use those models, but there are other ones that you can perfectly apply.
And they're all wonderful models in getting signal, some sense biased because of your frame of reference. We talked about, better questions at the outset, and looking for signals that can both be strong, which everybody sees, but I think more importantly, those weak signals, that what you're doing is helping, not hurting. So you mentioned you're starting something new. Center, enter, turn was a phrase that Esther Derby, Don Gray shared with me from Don's Aikido practice. So you go in centered, not wobbly, and you enter the system. And by you entering it, you've changed it already, as you've talked about. You've disturbed it. To use your book title, you've created ripples. How do you begin to make sense what ripples are important, or going back, what pebbles cause those ripples that might be important or not? How do you make sense of it all? That's the $1,000,000 question. Where do you start?
Okay, so the difficult answer to that one is 2 words. It depends. And then the next one is, it depends on what. There's a 1-word answer to that: context. It's very, very, very difficult. I've been once in a job interview I needed a leader for an agile office in an insurance company in Switzerland. And the guy said, so if it would give you the job, what's the first thing that you would do? And I thought, I will sit down the team and talk to them. Yeah, okay. But what's the first thing that you're going to do? I said, well, hold on. That is the first thing that I'm going to do. It's the first thing I need to do.
Listen.
Because only then I know what is the next first thing that I can do. right? So if you tell me that there is, and you had a very, very wonderful reason for the why, because in their operations part, I don't even remember what kind of company it was, but in their operations part, they were doing something Six Sigma lean kind of like. In the back office, they also wanted something. Okay, so what do you do? If they wanted something and you are already creating an agile office, you are deciding that the back office should work more agile. So, okay. So do people even know what it is? Did you ask that question? You can guess, I didn't get the job for obvious reasons. It's very hard for people to be confronted with reality. If there's one starting point for any assignment to start working on complex change, it is to check in with reality. Check in with reality, because it's the only way that you can figure out what is actually the first next thing to do. It's really difficult to say what's the first thing that you do. I personally, for me, it's the why, what, how. No? If I don't understand why a change is needed, if I can have a conversation with people, if they believe that this is the change that is needed now, then it's hard to get real change done. Then it's makeup. You know, at the end of the day, somebody comes with one of those baby towels and they clean your face, and you're back to your old self again. It's how it works. If the people don't share your opinion about the necessity of this change right now, and I'm not talking about selling it, I'm talking about having a conversation about it with them. If that doesn't give you the fight, if it doesn't feel like this is what people, maybe they do not agree with it, but at least they have some level of understanding on why this is indeed needed now. If they don't grasp that, they find something else first. Because the trick is to gain confidence, to gain the trust of people that what you see might also be important. But that won't work if you have never shown that you also have an interest in what's important to them. So there we go. From why something is needed, I've identified, hey, it might be that there's some friction with people, right, from the individual reactions. You have a conversation with these people, you might identify something within the what layer that you might need to do first in order to get started with what you have identified and in your why level, right? So this is why it's so interesting to look at the ripples. When I say, I see this coming, and if we don't want to be left behind, we need to start working on that. And somebody else says, yeah, all good. I get you, I get you.
Patrick, we are coming up on our time box, and it's been great to catch up.
We can do a part 2.
We can do a part 2. Thank you for your insights. Multiple kudos. Kudos for your first conference talk on crutches.
Thank you.
Kudos on publishing your first book, Navigating the Ripple Effects of Change Model Interactions. You know, among many things in the pre-production copies that I got, I love the abstract spot illustrations. They were like, wow, there's a lot going on here. And I also love the pull quotes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if I can get you to read one of them. Maybe the opening pull quote from Daniela Meadows. That really resonated.
So I think this is one that I live by. So I'll be more than happy to read it out. Yes, there are no separate systems. The world is a continuum, and where we draw a boundary around a system depends on the purpose of the discussion. And that's the whole answer. The answers that I gave you as well a little bit. I see them captured in there. No, it depends, and it depends on the context, right? So I'm not telling people that these are 5 types of change models that you should always apply and be very excessive in their application. Not people, but be aware that they exist. Be aware that you can use them, and that if you would find a way to not only take them off the shelf when you have a change at hand, but you can somehow build it in the way these models function, build them in your normal, regular, daily business life, you are much better prepared for foreseen or unforeseen change.
I love it.
Amen.
Amen. What are the best ways for our listeners to get in touch with you? Learn more? Maybe they want to buy you a beer.
They want to buy me a beer. I'm always available in Madrid. Anybody wants to buy me a beer, I never say no. I'm Dutch by nature. So if somebody buys me a beer, I don't say no. Um,
Show your gratitude.
yes, exactly. LinkedIn is the best place to get in touch with me.
Beyond Frameworks, Navigating the Ripple Effects of Change Model Interactions. We'll have a link in our show notes. Build a better future for yourself, your organization. Don't climb the corporate ladder. Find a different way.
Make somebody smile.
Make somebody smile.
Just a small smile.
Makes such a difference.
Look at them when that comes because you did something for them.
Yes, gratitude.
It's much more satisfying, at least. I don't know if it's success, but it's much more satisfying.
Indeed. So give us listeners a virtual smile. If you like this podcast, leave a review, a rating, or some comments on your podcast platform of choice. If you want to jump into the fray, come on over to our Discord server where you can share stories about how you stopped climbing the ladder and took a beer as gratitude instead. Subscribe to our podcast, catch the next episode. And finally, if you really want to help out and get some swag, you can become a patron of the show and help us offset our production and hosting costs. Until next time, keep experimenting, keep sensing, keep responding. Whatever you do, don't stick to the plan. Make good change happen. This is the Agile Uprising podcast. Okay, so now this is when the real thoughts kick in, when we've already stopped and we're like, oh, I forgot to say. So as a host, are there any final thoughts, Patrick? Maybe something that bubbled up.
Yeah, so Andy, thank you for asking. There was one example that I had in my head when you asked about the connections and the ripple effects of these models. And also, we got into a contract once with a pharma company that had just bought a very successful but very small competitor. 6 months in, they did a quarterly survey, and it turned out that their company culture got much lower grades than they hoped for. So they asked us to check in, see what's happening, and see why things are happening the way that's happening. Long story short, there's a lot of the difference came from the different ways people talk about the same thing. So it was a language problem on one hand. But another thing that popped up was that the CEO who contracted us to do this had a negative impact on the company culture because of his leadership style. So then we go from the culture model where we did the analysis and we can propose actions for improvement. It can be done. But there is one factor, individual behavior, individual response, that needs to be part of that. And the guy looked at us and said, yeah, you know what? Have you seen the business numbers? They're better than ever. So that's the other part of the what, no? The diagnostic model.
Yeah.
From the diagnostic to the why. So, okay, my culture is bad. But if the people don't like working here, they can find another job. Why do I need to change if I'm at the peak of my sales?
It's a great question.
It is a great question. So he didn't want to change. So my individual reaction model gives me input to my why. So although the management level thought it was needed to change the culture, through the individual reaction model of the CEO, you get insights into a part of what is the diagnostics, which is informing your why. So yeah, it might need to change, but not now.
Yeah.
Not the right time. So that's an example where I saw these models interact with each other. So, and then you don't come to a process model. It doesn't matter. Because there's nothing to change, not for this specific case.
That's why multiple viewpoints are so important.
This is where big consulting companies get stuck. And this is why big consultancies have invented this 70% failure for change number, because they get stuck, because they don't see this. They are unable to build that agility in their contracts with their customers in order to solve the things that are there really to solve, or to say, hey, you know what, if that is the problem, if that is the situation that we get as a feedback from the system, then we should stop this, because their only objective is earning money.
Bingo.
So what's the big challenge I think any consultant should have, is to make sure your customer doesn't need you anymore.
Work yourself out of the job.
And that can be done in a week's time, applying different change models.
A week's time, you say?
A month might be, especially if you use the artificial intelligence for that.
We're going to bring you back in 3 months after this gig that you're starting and see if you work yourself out of a job in the first week. There's your challenge. Cheers, my friend.
Give me a month.
All right. Give me 90 days.
Thanks, Andy.
See ya.
Bye.